Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're talking about something pretty wild. Genetic hacking. It sounds like science fiction, right? Like, could our DNA actually be the next target for cyber criminals?
It's a question a lot of people are asking, and yeah, it might have seemed like science fiction a few years ago, but the truth is, with all the progress in gene editing, we are now at a point where manipulating the very building blocks of who we are is a reality.
Wow. Okay, so when you say manipulating,
Yeah.
what exactly do you mean? I mean, I know we hear about CRISPR a lot these days, but can you break it down? Like, what exactly is that and why is it such a game changer?
CRISPR, think of it like you have a document, right?
Right.
And there's a typo. CRISPR is basically like a find and replace tool for DNA, so scientists can use it to target a very specific sequence and then correct a mutation, for example,
Yeah.
or even insert new genetic material altogether.
So like molecular scissors, that can cut and paste the code of life.
Exactly, and that opens up some incredible possibilities, like take inherited diseases, for example, cystic fibrosis.
Hmm.
CRISPR could potentially correct that faulty gene and bam, it's a cure, potentially. And that's just one example. We're talking sickle cell anemia, cancer, all sorts of things they're looking at with
I
CRISPR.
mean, that's incredible when you think about it. But this deep dive, we're not just here to like celebrate all the cool things about gene editing. We also want to look at the potential risks. So we've been checking out this episode of the Alternative World podcast, and they brought up this really unsettling idea of genetic cybercrime. Have you heard much about that?
Yeah, it's pretty unsettling when you start thinking about how this technology could be used for bad stuff. I mean, think about ransomware. Your computer gets locked up and they demand money to unlock it. Now imagine that, but with your DNA.
Wait, hold on. Genetic ransomware, what does that even mean? Like, how could someone do that?
It's not as crazy as it sounds. Okay, so let's say a hacker gets into a genetic database, like the kind that ancestry services use or research institutions, places like that. So they get in, and now they can potentially change your genetic profile, add harmful mutations, or even delete important information. And then they hold your DNA hostage until you pay up to fix it.
But wouldn't there be backups? You know, like with computers, can't you just restore your genetic information if something like that happens?
And that's the really scary part. See, unlike digital data, your DNA is the original. There's no backup copy. Any changes that are made to your genes, they could be permanent, and then that can impact your health, maybe even future generations.
Wow, that is scary. It's like messing with the source code of you.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just ransomware, right? What about genetic sabotage? Someone wants to take out a rival, maybe an athlete, mess with their genes to make them perform worse or get hurt easier.
Oh, man. Okay, yeah, that takes competition to a whole new level.
Yeah. And then you have to think about entire populations. Bioterrorism, right? Someone could engineer a disease to target a specific group, like really scary stuff.
This isn't just about data being stolen. It's like manipulating the core of who we are with potentially disastrous consequences.
And then you get into the whole designer babies thing.
Right.
If we can edit DNA, could parents actually start choosing the traits they want in their kids? Like, what if they want their child to be super athletic or really smart or have a certain eye color?
It's almost like designing a human being from a menu. Where do we draw the line there? And wouldn't that just create a whole new set of social inequalities?
It's a huge ethical dilemma, and there are definitely no easy answers. Some people argue that, well, parents already influence their kids in so many ways, so why not let them choose certain traits? Others worry that this could lead to this dystopian future with a genetic elite, widening the gap between the haves and have-nots.
Okay, so we've got this technology that could potentially cure diseases and totally change humanity for the better. But at the same time, it's got this potential for really bad stuff to happen. Unintended consequences, misuse. I mean, it's a lot to think about.
It is, and believe me, it gets even more complicated and interesting the deeper we go. Ready to explore what could happen with accidental errors and the possibility of like a black market for gene editing.
Hit me with it. I'm ready.
It really is something, isn't it? We're living in a time where we can actually edit genes. It's not science fiction anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing. And, you know, we talked about the scary stuff like ransomware and designer babies. But what about just messing up? I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Like even the best computer programmers, they make typos, right?
Yeah.
What happens if something like that happens with gene editing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, gene editing with CRISPR, it's still pretty new, relatively speaking. And any complex system like that is going to have, it's prone to errors. Just like think about a surgeon operating on the wrong organ. That's a mistake, right? Well, picture a scientist accidentally deleting the wrong gene or putting a piece of DNA in the wrong spot. it could be devastating.
And it's not like fixing a typo in a document, right?
Yeah.
This is changing the blueprint of life. What kind of ripple effects could we see from something like that?
Think about it. One gene can impact a whole bunch of traits. So a tiny mistake in one gene could have this cascading effect through the whole body. And that could lead to all sorts of health problems or even like developmental issues. And then these mistakes could be passed down to future generations, which could actually change the course of evolution.
So it's not just the person whose genes are edited, it's their kids, grandkids, and on potentially. I mean, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah, it really highlights how careful we need to be with all this. You need rigorous testing and a lot of caution. Gene editing, it's not something to be taken lightly. You're dealing with a really powerful tool, and you need to understand how genes work together and how they affect the human body.
Right, right. And that makes me think about, like, accessibility. We've talked about the potential for misuse, hackers, maybe some rogue scientists out there.
Yeah.
But what about just the average person? Could there be, like, a black market for gene editing where anyone could just, I don't know, buy some upgrade for themselves?
It's totally possible and something we have to be prepared for. Think about the drug trade, right? People are willing to pay a lot of money for something that'll enhance their performance or change their appearance, some kind of benefit, you know? Now imagine you could buy genetic modifications that would make you smarter, stronger, more attractive. It would be tempting, right?
Yeah, it would be. But wouldn't that just make inequality so much worse? The rich could just, like, buy all these enhancements for themselves and their kids, and everyone else gets left behind. It's like a real-life dystopian movie or something.
Yeah, it's a really valid concern. The whole idea of genetic enhancement brings up all these ethical questions. Fairness, justice, what does it even mean to be human? If we get to a point where people can buy their way to a genetic advantage, well, then the gap between the haves and the have-nots isn't just money or social status. It becomes genetic.
Okay, so we've talked about potential misuse, accidental errors, and the whole designer babies dilemma. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But the alternative world episode also brought up the role of these big tech and biotech companies. What kind of responsibility do they have in all this?
I mean, these companies are the ones at the forefront of all this. They're developing the tools, they're collecting all the data, they're driving all the innovation in this field. So that comes with a huge responsibility to make sure this technology is used ethically and that it benefits everyone.
It reminds me of what happened with social media, you know. It can connect people and spread information, which is great, but it can also be used to spread lies and manipulate people. Are we looking at the same kind of thing with gene editing?
Yeah, there are definitely some parallels there. You've got all this genetic data being collected by ancestry services, healthcare providers, researchers. And this data, it's incredibly valuable, not just for research. It could be used for marketing, insurance, even law enforcement. So we need really strong regulations to make sure this data is protected and that it's not used to discriminate against anyone.
So it's not just about the science. We need to think about the ethical side, the social implications, the legal side of it all.
You got it. And it's not just about preventing the bad stuff. We also have to make sure everyone has equal access to the benefits of this technology. If gene editing can cure diseases and make lives better, it shouldn't just be available to a few lucky people.
It feels like we're at this crossroads. We have this amazing technology with potential to really make things better for everyone. But then there's the potential for abuse, mistakes, and this gap between who can access it and who can't.
It is a complex situation, that's for sure, and there are no easy answers. But we need to have these conversations. We need to be open and honest about both the good and the bad of gene editing, and we need to figure out how to make sure it's used ethically to benefit all of humanity.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's a good place to take a quick break. We've covered a lot: the science behind CRISPR, designer babies, a potential black market for genetic modifications. It's a lot to take in.
It really is, but this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in this field.
And we'll be right back in a few minutes to do just that. We'll keep going deeper into the world of genetic hacking. Stay with us.
And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into the world of genetic hacking. We've talked about CRISPR, the ethical questions, the potential for both amazing breakthroughs and, well, some really scary stuff. It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. And going back to that alternative world episode, one thing they really emphasized was this idea of balance.
Yeah, that's important. We can't just get caught up in the scary headlines, you know, the ransomware designer babies, all that. We have to remember that gene editing could also totally revolutionize medicine and improve people's lives in ways we can barely imagine.
Absolutely. Think about it. We could wipe out inherited diseases that have been causing suffering for centuries. Huntington's, cystic fibrosis, even some types of cancer. They could become a thing of the past.
I mean, it's almost like we're on the verge of rewriting the rules of health, right? Parents wouldn't have to worry about passing down genetic disorders to their kids.
It's a powerful thought, and that's what's driving a lot of the research right now. But the key, like we've been saying, is to be really careful and always think about the ethics of it all.
So how do we make sure this technology is used for good? We talk about regulations, but I mean, where do you even start with something like this?
It's tough, but I think it has to start with open and honest conversations. We need scientists, ethicists, policymakers, everyone really, to come together and figure out a framework for responsible innovation.
Yeah, those conversations need to be happening now before the technology gets even more advanced. But what about us? What can we as individuals do?
Educate yourself. Learn about the science, the ethical stuff, how gene editing could impact us all. Stay up to date on the latest developments. Talk to your friends and family about it.
I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. Like, what can one person do? But knowledge is power, right? The more we understand, the better decisions we can make and the more we can advocate for responsible use.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Challenge assumptions. Demand transparency from the companies and institutions doing this research.
We can't just be passive observers. We have to be a part of shaping this technology. It can't be something that's just decided behind closed doors.
It affects all of us. The choices we make now are going to impact the future of humanity. It's a big responsibility.
It really is. So as we wrap up today, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. It's a question from that Alternative World episode, and it's really stuck with me.
Okay, I'm listening.
What can we do as individuals and as a society to use the power of gene editing for good while also protecting ourselves from the potential dangers?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we need to keep talking about. The future of gene editing is being written right now by all of us. And it's a future that has the potential to be amazing, but also really dangerous.
Well said. So thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of genetic hacking. We hope this deep dive has given you some new insights and maybe even made you think about things in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay curious, everyone. Stay informed and stay engaged in this conversation about the future of humanity. And thanks for listening.